Good luck.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Well, thanks for joining us today. Would love to hear where you're joining us from. Throw it into the chat. I'm joining from Vancouver, Canada.
I am joining from Sioux Falls, South Dakota
Love it.
in the United States.
Yay, we have another Vancouverite. Love it. Vienna, Berlin, from kinda sunny UK. Well, it's probably sunnier than here, Aaron. It's like pretty dark. Toronto, New York, Serbia, amazing. Pakistan, Michigan, no way. Mars, yeah. Florida, Philadelphia, amazing. Awesome. As we just wait for a few more folks to join us, let me know what you're most excited for today in terms of hearing Shane talk. WordPress, WordPress, WordPress. Amazing. Excited for dank Valhalla memes. You and I both, Aaron. Love it. Senegal. No way. That's crazy. Sweet. I think we can get things started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Neha Varshneya. I am Gatsby's Director of Product Marketing. And today, I think we all know why we're up right now tuning into this webinar. We have some really, really exciting news to announce. And there's no one better to announce this and kind of dive into the details than Gatsby's very own Senior Product Manager, Shane Thomas. Shane, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you and let you kick things off.
All right. Yeah, excited to be here. Excited to unveil something that we've been working on for a long time. We've, had a great team behind this, and I'm excited that I get to be the one to kind of talk about it publicly. At least, we've talked about it in private for a while, but to publicly talk about it. So that's exciting. And with that, I guess I'll share my screen and we'll get started. So this is meant to be kind of interactive. So ask questions along the way. Neha, feel free to interrupt me, between slides or whatever. It's going to be, there'll be definitely be a presentation and we'll do a demo, but we want to have a lot of time for questions and discussion as well. My audio volume is a little low. Okay, I can turn that up. Is that any better, Tanya? All right. So yeah, let me know if there's any questions or anything along the way, and we will go ahead and get started. So let's kick this off. Well, we all know why we're here. We're talking about Valhalla Content Hub. So as Neha mentioned, I'm a senior product manager. I was, fortunate enough to get to work on this project with the team for a long time. It's been something that's been a long time. It's been a thing we've thought about for a long time, and then been working on very in depth in the last 6 months. And so why does Valhalla exist? Well, new technologies lead to new challenges. So modern websites are complicated. You often are pulling content from multiple places, and then you're piecing that together. And ultimately, the end goal of a website is to build a compelling and dynamic user experience, right? And with the move to a more of a Jamstack architecture, sometimes that can be challenging. So that you get a lot of benefits, but you also get some new challenges. And before we talk about what it unlocks, let's talk about why it exists. Well, one of the things that we hold as kind of a truth is that we believe the best part about Gatsby, or one of the best parts, is our ecosystem of source plugins. So we've changed a lot and added a lot of new features over the years, but our source plugin architectures stayed very consistent and matured over the last 5 years. So it's been something we've been working on for a long time. And without source plugins, life can be a little bit sad, right? And the reason is because you end up having to, let's say you're using something like Contentful, you have to write a lot of code and learn how Contentful's API works. You have to read a bunch of API docs, and you have to handle all that yourself. We like to call it glue code, and you have to write quite a bit of it. And it gets even more complex if you ever have to maybe integrate with more than one CMS. You have to become CMS API experts for each different CMS that you want to integrate with. But with Gatsby, it's a lot simpler. You just add a source plugin, do a little bit of configuration. You can drop in information on how to connect to your CMS, and then you're presented with graphical. And so for those of you that have used Gatsby, which I'm guessing is a lot of you on this webinar, you know that's one of the benefits of Gatsby is you can connect your source, you can use graphical, and then from there you can build out your pages. So if you think about how Gatsby works currently, we really have Gatsby the framework, and that's the open source framework that you all probably have used. And then we have Gatsby Cloud, which is the fastest, best way to build and host and preview that those changes or that website built with the framework. So if we think about what happens kind of during that build process, it starts with this sourcing process, or this process of going out to the CMS and getting all the data that you need in order to build your website. And then it feeds in from the source plugin into a GraphQL data layer. And then you can build with the tools that you already know how to use, which is React and GraphQL. And from there, we're able to generate pages. A lot of times, most of the time, this is static pages, right? These are SSG. But on Gatsby Cloud, you can use deferred static generation, DSG, or you can even server-side render pages. And then, of course, deploy it to Gatsby Cloud. You can host it, you can preview, all of those different tools that Gatsby Cloud provides. So that's kind of the build pipeline of what a normal build looks like when you are working with a Gatsby site today. And one of the things that we've always been thinking about, and if you've really followed us for a while, we talk a lot about how Gatsby is fast and how really we aim to be fast and always be improving build speeds. That's why we are very confident that Gatsby Cloud is the fastest way to build a Gatsby site, because we care about it a lot. But we always ask ourselves, how can we be a little bit faster? What can we do to make that faster? And we hear things like this when talking to customers. Build times can vary based on our CMS APIs. Build times are our biggest challenge right now. And then build times often time out or perform very slowly for my marketing team's website. It's challenging to explain to the marketers that this is caused by our WordPress site's API performance. So we like to talk to our customers. We like to figure out what challenges are they trying to solve, what are they running into, and then how can we help them solve those problems better. And what we've learned over time is that CMS APIs can quickly become a bottleneck, even more so when you're integrating in with more than one. But you have all these different things that can reach out to your CMS API. You have local builds when you're developing locally. You have branch builds or production builds when you actually merge changes or push changes. You have pull request builds, which is anytime you open up a pull request, there's builds that are happening and they're going out to your CMS API. And then you have preview builds as well. So all these things are funneled through your CMS API. And a lot of times you can run into rate limits, you can run into bandwidth limits, and it can be error prone and potentially expensive too. So we started to ask ourselves, what if we didn't have to source content to build? And maybe more importantly, maybe not never source content. We have to get the content some of the time. But what if we could source that content less? What if we didn't have to go out to the API as often? What if we could cache that data layer that we already use and then use that for all these different types of builds? So we did it. So we built this kind of cached data layer where we said, okay, you're going to source the content once, and then you're going to be able to use that content over and over again with different types of builds. And it doesn't work with every build, but it works with a lot of builds. And what we've realized, so we've tested this on a number of different sites. I just have two examples here. We use it on gatsbyjs.com, which is sourcing from Contentful and WordPress. In our median build times, when it has to go out to the CMS API, around 250 seconds. With Valhalla Content Hub turned on, you can see it's significantly less. But what we often run into is kind of that P99 time, the time when the API just decides it's not going to respond or you're getting rate limited. And our WordPress API often can do this occasionally where it'll slow down or even time out. And so we have every once in a while, some very slow builds. But with this, it's very consistent. The times are the same. And the same is true with a large 32,000 page benchmark site using Drupal. You can see the median time is significantly lower, and there's still that, every 1 or 2 or 3 in 100 builds is just really slow. And this drastically speeds that up. And so then we were starting to think, we have this cache data layer, we have this thing that's sitting there, and we're using it to speed up our builds. But what else can we do? And so we went out and talked to more customers, and we hear things like, we don't want to manage 2 different types of GraphQL queries. So we use Contentful's REST API for SSR data. So that means they're going out to Contentful's API kind of in real time. And it would be great if I could access my Gatsby data with SSR. We've heard that a lot. One engineer said, we have a lot of real estate sites, and filtering those requires us to pull more data from the CMS API and store it in a giant JSON object that they then filter through on the client. And then I'm running a bunch of websites where you can query the stock, and I'm using Apollo to query the CMS backend, but it's buggy and the results are sometimes different from my Gatsby GraphQL, which is used during the build process. So then we started thinking, could we use this cache data layer to do something about that and solve some of these problems? And you can see that right now, this is kind of the workflow where we have this really nice build pipeline, but then for, functions or SSR, you're kind of just like going back out to the CMS API. You're kind of going outside of this build pipeline, and you're just needing to still learn how to integrate with these different APIs. You're reading a bunch of API docs, you're writing some of that glue code, and you're managing 2 different ways to query data in your Gatsby site. So then we decided, okay, let's bring the development experience of being able to query all your data through graphical using GraphQL queries. Let's just make that public. Let's build it so you can use that with your public data, and you can use that with Gatsby SSR and functions. So this way you can use the same GraphQL queries, whether they're, fragments that you write or, different ways that you want to query your data. You can use the same at build time and at runtime in Gatsby SSR and functions. So this, we started to realize, begins to unlock even more interesting use cases. We started to hear things like, it'd be great to be able to use the data layer in Expo apps, or maybe a React Native app that shares a lot of content with your Gatsby site. And then also hearing things like, it works pretty nicely in Electron, but it'd be great if you could use the same data for websites, desktop apps, and mobile apps. And then we've heard, some of our customers that maybe use Gatsby for some projects say things like, we have a Next.js project and need to integrate it with Drupal and some legacy APIs. So now we're considering just building our own GraphQL data layer to make the API more consistent. And so what this allows us to do is unlock this for not just Gatsby SSR and Gatsby functions, but unlock your Gatsby data to be used with other frameworks. So that's why we're really happy today to introduce Valhalla Content Hub. And as you can see in this diagram, you're able to source your content from everywhere that has a source plugin, right? You can use Gatsby source plugins. You can source your content into Valhalla Content Hub. You can use the GraphQL queries you already are writing for build time. And then you can use that anywhere you want. It works with zero config with Gatsby. You can, it works with the existing Gatsby site with your Gatsby source plugins that you have today. But you can use that data with Next.js or Astro or Svelte or React Native app or wherever else you might want to use that data. So really, we're building a content hub from all your CMS data that can be used any framework, anywhere you want. So we talked a lot about it. We're going to show a short demo here, and definitely interested in your questions. And if after you kind of see the demo is going to be pretty short. Let's start with the end product, though. Let's start with what we built. So this is just an example site, and you can see it's powered by Valhalla and Gatsby, but it tells you on the page where this data is coming from. So this data is coming from Contentful, and it's statically generated. So the original data came from Contentful. It was fed into Valhalla, and this page was then built from that Valhalla data. And you can do interesting things with this. You can search, and this is going out, and now you can see that this is no longer statically rendered. This is rendered with SSR using Valhalla data that was originally built, from Contentful's data. You can do interesting things like filter by the category. But a lot of times you have maybe a marketing team that is really tied to WordPress and they want to use WordPress for the blog. And so we have a blog built with WordPress data. You can see this is WordPress and it's statically rendered. And again, getting all the data from Valhalla. If we click on a post, you can see now this is going out with SSR and getting data directly from Valhalla's real-time GraphQL API and building this page in real time. And then last, we wanted to add the ability to buy products on this example website. So we have some Shopify data that is using static to generate this initial page. And then this page is, of course, generated with SSR, and it's doing the same thing. So the benefit to this is at no point in any of this experience did we ever reach out to any CMS API. We were able to use GraphQL for everything. We never had to read any API docs about, learning Contentful's API, learning WordPress's WP GraphQL, which is a little bit different than what the GraphQL you'd write in Gatsby. And you never had to worry about which of Shopify's many APIs to use because it's all done just with GraphQL. And so let's look at what this looks like now on Gatsby Cloud. So we have a test site here. And the first thing we'll go through is there's a new settings tab called Content Hub. And this first step is just to enable that cached data layer, which again speeds up your branch builds, your pull request builds, makes sourcing a lot faster. It caches it once and it reuses it over and over again. And not every build can be built completely from your Content Hub data. Let's say, for instance, you have a pull request and you are changing some of your source plugin config options. Of course, it has to go out and has to source that. But once that's merged, we have that cache data, and then we use that again for future builds. And then, of course, you can enable the GraphQL API, which is what you need to be able to access your data with SSR or in real time. So we have both those turned on. And what you'll see here is a new Content Hub tab where all of your different events, you can see we have a bunch of different things that are funneling in. We have contentful data updates, and then it syncs data out to Valhalla API, which is the actual API you can use. If we go into one of these, you can see we have logs, just like you'd expect if you've ever looked at Gatsby builds on Gatsby Cloud before. So we can see what happened during this contentful update. And then if we go back, you can see we have the actual URL to our API here and the ability to browse that schema. And this just opens it up in Apollo Explorer, but you can see just like you'd expect with graphical developing locally, we can see some WP content nodes, that's WordPress. We are able to see down here, there's some contentful data, and then you can see the Shopify data. And so we can run this and, I'm searching all contentful animal for Apollo, which you can see it must be a kitten because it's it's a cat. Let's see, what else do we have here? Let's pass an animal type just to make sure. Yep, animal type is a cat. You can see it also passes all the Gatsby image data. So this Gatsby image data can be used. This will eventually allow you to do interesting things like maybe use Gatsby plugin image on a Next.js website or another React framework. So things that you might not have thought of before are starting to become unlocked by having this data available after the build. So if we take a look at, let's go in and make a content update in Contentful. So I will look for, let's just edit this one, Milo. Let's go ahead and just add some text here. Milo is a good dog. And we will go ahead and see there's Milo there. Let's publish. And what this is going to do as soon as I click publish is it's going to kick off. So you might normally expect to see a build here, but it actually is going to kick off first a source event in Content Hub. You can see it's already syncing the data to Valhalla API. Once that data is synced, then you will see a build kick off, which it looks like it's already been built. So 1019, it's already should be available. If I come back to the main page, I'm just going to refresh. And I think it was Milo, right? That we were searching for. Oh, there he is. And you can see the text is there. The change is there. And this is of course generated through SSR. So that would mean if I go to here, and I look for Milo, I should be able to see, and we're going to, yep, there you go. So you can see that the change we made is available. It's there. It took a few seconds and it's already available on the Valhalla Content Hub GraphQL API, as well as if I would have wanted to statically render that page, I would have been able to get that in my normal build process. The other interesting thing that you can do is, as we mentioned before, you can use it in other frameworks. So we built the same site. This one here is with Next.js. So again, nothing fancy, right? This is just a pretty standard website, but you can see this was built with Next. And you can still filter just like you'd expect. You can still access your blog data. Looks like we don't have images working on this one yet. And then we, are getting data from Shopify. So this is a Next.js app built with Valhalla API content. And then last but not least, we also did the same thing with Astro. You can see, we have an Astro app. We have the data getting pulled in, and this is just coming from that GraphQL API. And so with that, that was the demo. We can get a few more slides, but if we do have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. Any questions before we continue, Neha, or should I keep going through this and save some time at the end?
We have quite a few questions, so let's jump into some now, and then we can continue your presentation. But let's get to some of these folks right now. So Emmanuel is asking, is it possible to somehow show in WordPress that Gatsby Cloud is currently building to have our customers ask us less, why are my changes not showing, i.e. an indicator inside WordPress that shows orange when building, green when success, and red when fail?
That is a very good question. So this isn't necessarily something that Valhalla Content Hub unlocks, and it's not something that you can easily do today, but it is on our roadmap in the future. And it's probably not me, that I won't be our team that builds this, I'm not going to commit them to a timeline, but it does sound like it's going to happen at some point, in that we'll have a public cloud API where you can access that data of your build status, as well as, do other things that you might need to, that you might currently manually do on Gatsby Cloud in some kind of an automated fashion. So that would be something that I would keep an eye out for in the future.
Awesome, great question. We have another question here, Shane, for you. How will this affect local development?
So that is a really good question. So there's a couple things you might need to do that are slightly different. In a lot of cases, you're going to want to push up your source plugin config kind of early in the project, so you can get your real-time GraphQL API available, especially if you're building that runtime functionality. So there's a little bit different of a process, but really you just want to get that public API available and use that while you're in development. And that way you'll have that ability to see those results as you're developing things out. The other thing that we didn't really talk about yet, and it's not available, but something else we're considering, is how could we use this, when we had a slide back here where you have local builds, right? How can we improve the local build experience? Because if you're working with a large content database, right, or have a lot of content in your CMS, that local build experience can sometimes be very slow because you're still going out to the CMS API. And so one of the things we're considering doing is building some way for you to use this cache data layer right from Gatsby Cloud without ever having to go out to a CMS API. So we can speed up significantly local builds as well.
Sweet. Shane, we have about 15 more questions, so let's get through these as much as we can. So is Valhalla a cloud-only offering, or can I self-host it?
That's also a good question. Right now, it's only available on Gatsby Cloud, and I don't know that we'll have a self-hosted version in the near future. At least it's not on the immediate roadmap.
Tom is asking, is this Pet Snuggles website open source for our code viewing pleasure?
It is. There's still a lot we're doing to make improvements. It'll be shared after, but yeah, you can see this is a public example. Our goal is we are also going to want, some community members to use the API and over time add more to this frameworks. We have just a few examples, and the examples were, we threw them together relatively quickly because we wanted to show what's possible. We can do so much more with it. And that's where we're really hoping to engage with the community and see where else, what else can we do? What else aren't we even thinking of that we could possibly extend the use cases of Valhalla into other ways.
Sumit is asking, how would you dehydrate the cache?
So I'm not sure I exactly understand your question, but I guess maybe you're worried about the cache basically being invalidated. And if that's the case, it's using the same incremental build system that Gatsby Cloud uses. So it's very smart about how it stores that cache. And it essentially looks at all your Gatsby plugin options, and that's how it knows if it can use the cache, if the cache is safe to use, and if not. If for some reason you change something and the cache isn't safe to use, it'll go out to your CMS API just like it normally would. So your builds will continue on as expected. There's also, let's say you do change something in your CMS, you change the structure and you want to resource everything. In Content Hub, you can source content, or you can kind of do the option to clear everything out and resource everything. So those would be kind of the options for invalidating the cache.
Cool. Javier is asking, does Valhalla allow auth to the content sources? E.g., if I was using Drupal, could log in as different users that have different roles/permissions via Valhalla?
Great question. So auth is not built in that it's something you can just turn on and connect to. However, really what we built is the tools. So you could build kind of that middle layer yourself, kind of in your Gatsby site, and you could use whatever authentication service you want. We do have plans to provide some additional, documentation on how to do that, as well as some potentially helpful tooling to make that process easier. But it is possible, but that's one of those things where, because each authentication provider is different and what you might want to show could vary, it's really in the hands of the developer to decide how they want to implement that authentication, but it is possible.
Nice. Javier has a few more follow-up questions for you, Shane. So what is the latency between Valhalla updates and a published change from the CMS?
Great question. It depends. It depends on, if you have a Gatsby cloud site, you'll know that, build times can vary a little bit dependent on what CMS you're using, how much content's in that CMS. There's a lot of variations. You can see in this example that we did, it was there was probably 1 second of sourcing that was included here, but it's probably about 6 to 7 seconds. It could vary. It could be, 5 seconds. It could be 30 seconds. It really just depends on how the build times and sourcing times of your site, which is a little bit still dependent on your CMS API as well.
Makes sense. And last but not least question from Javier, is this only available on Gatsby Cloud, or is there an OS self-hosted version?
Yep. So that sounds similar to the other question. Right now, it's only available on Gatsby Cloud. And then, we're always, it's built on top of open source technology. So if you look at, it's all based on our source plugin ecosystem. So it's using the same source plugins you can see that are available in open source. What we did is kind of combine that together into our specific to Gatsby's infrastructure, Gatsby Cloud's infrastructure. And so we kind of create that cached layer. So it's not open sourced yet. I don't know if we don't have any immediate plans to open source the full product, but there are pieces of it that are, it's all built on top of, Gatsby's open source framework, and it's built on top of the source plugin ecosystem, which is all open source.
Cool. Can I then use the Gatsby image component on the other React frameworks?
So that is the idea. There's probably still some things. Gatsby's image component was built specifically for Gatsby. So I think we still have to probably do a few things to make that work, but that's our goal, right? Is that we know it can work That we just need to maybe make a few changes and make sure it works everywhere. We did have it working at one point on the Next.js site. I think we ran into a few minor bugs that we're working through, but yeah, at some point in the future, you'll be able to very likely use Gatsby plugin image in other React frameworks.
Awesome. How will CMS preview work in Valhalla, e.g. preview from WordPress?
So the idea is that shouldn't change because your preview is still built using Gatsby's incremental builds. So however your preview works today isn't going to be significantly different. The only thing that it would change is if you had, real-time data getting pulled into your page using SSR or something like that, then maybe it might change a little bit how that data gets there. But for the most part, if you're just previewing a statically rendered page, that process isn't going to change from the way it is today.
Okay, let's do a couple more, Shane, and then we'll jump back into your presentation and then hop back to the questions. But let's do two more. Is the content layer available for SSR pages before the Gatsby build has run?
Okay. Good question. You would need at least one build to run in order for your API to have data. But then, yes, once it's available, then if you have subsequent builds, that data is already there. So you could access that, through SSR before the build is run. I think you might also be asking, and definitely add some clarification if I'm off base here, but you might be asking if the data is, let's say you make some changes in your CMS and it comes into Gatsby's data layer and now it's available. So the way it works is, let's say we make a change in Contentful, it kicks off that sourcing event, which loads the data. And then kind of two things start to happen. We start a build and we also sync that data to the API. Now it is possible. And a lot of times what will most likely happen is that data is going to be available on the API before your build is done. Usually it's right around the same time. But what you could see, and in this case, I think this is a problem with all real-time data, and I think it actually solves it really well, is let's say we had added a new pet, and you can see this is a statically rendered page. So if I searched for that pet, and let's say it was available in the API just a little bit before it was available on the statically generated page, I could probably find that pet, even though it might not show up here in this page. I think that's actually the best solution, because if you, for some reason, were looking for it, it would be there. It might be there, through SSR moments before it's available statically, but the API data is very likely going to be there before your static build is rendered. So I think that answers that question, but let me know if there's more to it than that.
Cool. I know a lot of people have been asking this, Shane. So let's get this answered before we hop back into your presentation. Do you know when it will be available to everyone? And is it available for pro or only enterprise pricing tiers?
That is a really good question. So right now it is available to agency and enterprise customers. And the reason is because when we talked, it's very much an enterprise use case in that we have a lot of enterprises that really need this, and we want to work closely with them to get it implemented for them. And through working with them, then we will figure out ways to maybe scale it out to a broader audience. So agency and enterprise right now, there is the ability, if you are a professional customer, you can request early access. And what we're looking for there is we do want to just work with some other professional customers and figure out if they have interesting use cases we haven't thought through, maybe get some early feedback on some of the other new things that we have coming up, in the near future that we want to release and we want to get feedback on before it goes out. And so we are looking for some of those customers too. So you can request that early access right from your Gatsby Cloud dashboard.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Shane. Shall we hop back into the rest of the presentation?
Yeah, there's not too much left, but essentially we just want to do a recap, and then if there's more questions, we can definitely stick around and answer them. So when you think about it, Valhalla provides really, and this shouldn't say centralized repository, it should say centralized data layer, that gives enterprises an architecture for managing content across a variety of sources. making it accessible via unified GraphQL API for building content sites, e-commerce platforms, and native and web applications. So it's really that a cached centralized data layer. And some of the things that you can do, and we've already went through this, so this is kind of review, but you can speed up your Gatsby builds. So if you have a Gatsby site and you source content from a CMS, you can get build time speed increases. You can create that unified, content hub, which is accessible through a real-time GraphQL API. So you can source once and then query from anywhere. You can really use it to build dynamic web experiences. So before, during runtime functions in SSR, we're going back to the CMS API. Now you just go right to this data layer, and it really helps build, really dynamic filtering experiences. So if you had, filtering products, things that, you couldn't easily do you couldn't do statically because there's too many options, deciding if you want to sort by price, high to low on a product filtering page, for instance, is very difficult to do statically because you start to get way too many options where the static generation time takes too long. With this, you can do it in real time, and you can still use those same GraphQL queries you would use, while using Gatsby, or of course using Next or anywhere else. And then, as I just mentioned, the front end frameworks and love are supported. It's just a GraphQL API, so you can use the GraphQL API however you want. You can connect your content sources and then use that data wherever. And then, this is one of the things we hear most when talking to enterprises, is that a lot of times you have a legacy API, whether that's an inventory system or some kind of old CMS that maybe has an API, but it's maybe not very robust, and migrating off of it is too time consuming. So you can connect your legacy API along with maybe something like Contentful or another CMS. And over time, you can gradually migrate out, or you can use a more modern CMS for a new part of your website, but the old part can still be built from that old legacy data. And so use cases of where you need to really connect content from various different sources, it now becomes possible. And if you want to request access to this and learn a little bit more, you can go to this URL here, gatsby.dev/Valhalla. And then, let us know, reach out to us, let us know how you think you could use it. And we'll talk about, getting you access and having you try it out. There's going to be some links, and I'm guessing we'll share these slides after, that we have a blog post that is probably public now, which is just going to be going out soon. The examples repo, which is public, and then the actual docs on gatsbyjs.com. And with that, definitely stay in touch with me. I'm on Twitter, smthomas3. Make sure to follow Gatsby on Twitter as well. We've been doing a lot of memes and things lately, so if you want some developer humor, that's a good place to go for that. And with that, I guess, Neha, maybe we can answer some more questions and see what else everyone's asking.
Let's do it. Well, thank you, Shane, so much for that deep dive. For everyone tuning in, I have posted the link to our landing page. Be sure to check it out. Our press release just went out. We have a great Valhalla Explained blog post in there. Our VP of Product and Engineering, Dustin Shao, has recorded a really cool demo. So be sure to share that out with your friends and colleagues and anyone else that you think would be excited to learn more about Valhalla. And then, of course, Robert just asked, I missed a lot. Will this be posted to watch again? It will be. We will be sending out a recap email with both the recording from our Gatsby 5 webinar that happened earlier this week, as well as today's webinar with Shane. So if you're not signed up for a newsletter, make sure you do that, but it will also be posted onto the Valhalla landing page. Sweet. So we're having a lot more questions trickle in, Shane. So let's get to these. Roger is asking, is there any special handling for arbitrary files on Valhalla, or will we be passing down URLs for Gatsby and other consumers to handle?
So you will be, files are always an interesting thing. So for instance, on images, you want to pair this with some kind of image CDN service, whether it's Gatsby's image CDN or, some CMS API image CDN. Contentful has an image CDN, Shopify has an image CDN. Ideally, you'd use Gatsby's image CDN for it, but which handles that that passing through of files that aren't just images, even though it says image CDN, it does work. It does pass through other types of file requests. And so in that case, that's what you'd want to use for file handling.
Cool. Does it support sanity.io, prismic.io? How about API data from microservices like AWS?
So right now, and that's a good point. One thing we have what I'll call first class support for WordPress, Drupal, Contentful, and Shopify. We'll be releasing support for a lot of our other source plugins in the near future. We do kind of have the option too, when working with our enterprise customers, to help guide them in how they could connect this to their legacy API systems that they might have, because we know that's something that is commonly a difficult experience for them, as far as they have this old system and they want to get the data out. How can they do that? And so we can help guide them through that process as well. So yeah, you can connect to other types of systems like a microservice or something. And we would be happy to kind of share some docs and work with you if you have a need of something like that.
Yeah, great question. Shane, can Valhalla distinguish between a draft and published content, for example? If I make changes to published content in Drupal and save the latest version as a draft, is Valhalla smart enough to show the draft version on CMS preview, but the older published version on the production site?
So CMS preview is already kind of smart enough to be able to do that without Valhalla being in the mix. You can already set that up so your CMS preview can show draft content, but your build will not access it. Right now, CMS preview doesn't pull its data from Valhalla because of that reason. Because your preview data is not always going to be the same as your production build data. In the future, we have kind of this story of where you might want multiple Valhalla instances, one for your production and one that you could point at preview. But in most cases, for preview is already fast and it already just pulls directly from your CMS. So you can use preview as you do today, and then your production and your pull request builds will utilize Valhalla's Content Hub cache in order to build.
Sweet. Do non-Gatsby sites need you to create a Gatsby site to create the content?
Today, yes. We'll just leave it at that.
Ronald is asking, for legacy systems, do you have to write a sourcing plugin?
That's correct. And so we have updated our source plugin docs a little bit, and we do have some additional tools that'll be coming out in the future to make that process even easier. Right now, yes, you write your own source plugin, but depending on how much data and what you need, writing a source plugin can actually be pretty simple. If you have some more complex needs, writing a source plugin can get a little bit more complicated. Our goal is, kind of one of our long-term goals is that you should be able to write a simple source plugin in a day. And so, we're not quite there yet. We have some more work to do, but that's what we're striving towards.
Sweet. Chris is asking the question of the hour. Content Hub right now is in early access. Do you know when it will be fully available?
So you can request access now, and we don't have a set date as far as when it's going to be. You can just self-serve turn it on, because we don't know. It might, as of right now, it's only for enterprise and agency customers, and they can request and get access now. As far as like an official, GA launch date, we don't have that set yet.
Cool. We have another question here. Can we create a cloud project to only expose an API and not bother with the front end stuff?
Yes. So basically all you would do is right now, you just use the default starter, don't care about the front end, and connect a few source plugins, and you'd be up and running. Your site could technically have a front end on Gatsby Cloud, but you wouldn't even have to turn on hosting and you could use it. So yes, you don't really need the Gatsby front end. You could just use the API.
Cool. Anthony is asking, in terms of the use case with CMS bottleneck, is that more the amount of content and size of the site or the number of CMS APIs?
It could be both. The more APIs you connect, the more of a bottleneck there could be. You because you have to go out to different, you have to go out to more APIs. But a lot of times it's the sheer number of content too, and getting that much data out of an API, like especially specifically with, WordPress and Drupal, where you might be self-hosting it, or you might be using, a hosting provider that can't handle, you trying to consume that much data that fast, or at least maybe not be able to handle it in all circumstances every time. And so that's where you start to see a bottleneck, is with a larger amount of content. You're much more likely to hit the bottlenecks.
Yeah, makes sense. Luke is asking, would pulling through content from WordPress website pull SEO data too?
Yes, you can configure that. Any data that you store in WordPress, you can pull through, and then you could utilize on your Gatsby site. But I don't think it comes through automatically. The data is there, but how you use it isn't automatic. You would have to say, this meta tag description goes in to, if you're using Gatsby's head component, goes into this post on this, page or whatever. So yeah, the data's there. You would just have to wire it all up.
We have a few more questions here. So are there complexity limits on queries, or can we, like in normal Gatsby fashion, be sure that all content can be retrieved in a single query?
The goal is the same as what you can do locally, you can do in Valhalla API. Now, the one thing you do have to keep in mind is the more data you pull, the longer the query is going to take, the more bandwidth it's going to use. There are some, ideally you only want to pull the data you need. You don't want to pull necessarily more than that. I guess that's one of the powers of GraphQL, right? Is you get to define exactly what fields you want, rather than just pulling, all the data in all the fields. And so, yes, you can technically do that. You can use it however you want. Although we would always recommend just pull the data you need, so it's as fast as it possibly can be, and you're using it the smallest amount of bandwidth you can.
Alexandra is wondering, which plugins are available? Is it only source plugins?
Yes, it's only source plugins that are available to pull data into Content Hub, because that's how the sourcing process actually works with source plugins to source the data from some kind of external system. And as we kind of talked about, there are other types of plugins like Gatsby plugin image, which could work at some point with this, but it's not technically part of Valhalla. It just so happens that it could work with another system potentially. And again, it doesn't work out of the box today, but we do imagine in the future that it will.
Fingers crossed. Are updates to the data layer atomic, or is there a chance that an SSR query could get a partially updated result?
So this is one of the really cool things, and it's kind of the innovative things that we didn't really talk about. I guess I can tell you a little bit about how it works, in that, yes, they are atomic. And what's really nice is it's actually built on top of like a ledger of read and write and delete operations. And so what that means is you can actually go back to the status of your API at a specific point in time. So we don't have anything in the UI that lets you do that today, but it would be possible for you to say, I really want to know what the state of my API was, 17 minutes ago, and it would tell you and you could get the exact data that you had at that point in your API, because it's all based on a ledger system that tracks every operation that happens either into or out of the API. So how the data gets funneled into a ledger that you can then use that data then gets passed through and becomes available in the API.
Cool. Are there plans for Valhalla to allow for write operations to the CMS to further reduce my API usage?
Nothing's necessarily been decided yet on that, but it is something that we've certainly talked a lot about.
And Daniel is wondering, are there any limitations in using the Gatsby Hub in terms of the amount of data?
No, there aren't any limitations on how you want to use it or the amount of data you want to pull in. It's definitely, you can use what you need. Depending on your use case, of course, though, there's more bandwidth, and so that factors into the cost and things like that.
Cool. We have a site that uses the Gatsby GraphQL toolkit to build a custom source plugin. Will this just work with Valhalla?
this is kind of one of those use cases similar to, connecting to a legacy system or a different API that doesn't have an officially supported source plugin. It won't just work today, but if you talk to us, we can talk through and help you make sure that it works. There wouldn't be, the idea is that any source plugin can work with Valhalla. We've just selected a few to make sure that we kind of test the most important ones that we work with most often first, and then over time work with other source plugin systems or in CMS systems. But yes, the answer is we can certainly get it to work with any source plugin you have, but we'd want to talk to you and just make sure we know how it works, what you're doing, and then turn it on for you and let you try it out.
Cool. Mahesh is asking, where is the Valhalla cache stored? Is it pushed to the same CDN that Gatsby hosting uses?
So all the data is available through the same platform that Gatsby is using today. So we use GCP, Google Cloud for that. And so all the data is stored there.
Cool. Can you write to the GraphQL database by using a mutation?
So not currently. Now, I guess we kind of answered that before, but yeah, not at this moment. Possibly something we might consider in the future.
Cool. And last but not least, Shane, you're almost there. Can you make data updates trigger builds for other frameworks?
Can you make data updates trigger builds for other frameworks? A lot of times you can. So I guess the answer is it depends, because you can, in a lot of CMSs, you can trigger you can have a webhook go out when you save content, and so it would be sourcing at the same time. That could get into a point where maybe the data isn't always available, I guess. And so the answer is not. If you're asking if you can have it source content into Gatsby and then having that, as soon as it's content source, trigger an external build hook or something, not today, but that is a good idea and something that we will very likely consider in the near future, because I think it's a very common use case that's going to be needed.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I know we're running close to time, so just wanted to wrap up really quickly. Thank you, Shane, for the incredible presentation, running us through the demo, fielding, I think, 40 plus questions in the last little while.
It was rapid fire.
Yeah, rapid fire, put you in the hot seat. So thank you for that. For everyone tuning in, if you would like to catch the recording of this webinar, it will be posted on the Valhalla landing page. Check out the press release, spread the good word, share your excitement on Twitter. Would love to retweet your memes, your tweets, anything you have coming our way. Please tweet out, share it with your audience. We work tirelessly on putting this out for all of you, so would love any excitement that you have to share. Again, I just shared the URL again in the chat, so please check it out, watch the demo, watch it again because it's super wicked. And thank you, Shane, again, for taking all of us through this. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
See you, everyone.
Bye.